Okay, thanks everyone. I would now like to welcome, we're going to do a kind of Yukon Spotlight panel. And I would like to welcome Nicole Adshead-Bell, co-founder of NIKII Communications, who's going to introduce the panel for us.
With strong government support, respectful partnerships with First Nations, and a richly endowed but underexplored terrain, Yukon delivers exceptional upside for investors in gold and critical mineral exploration. Only in Yukon does the government invest directly in promoting its mining sector. Through the Yukon Mining Alliance, public funding helps showcase our companies and projects to the world. Yukon Mining Alliance brings together 13 leading companies, all advancing the next generation of Canadian mining. From multi-million-ounce gold discoveries to massive critical metals resources, Yukon companies are building a new mining district in Canada. With modern roads, grid power accessibility, access to a deep water port, and a commitment to responsible development, the Yukon is built for success. Major mining companies and investors are already here. The Yukon offers security, stability, and scale. Gold and critical minerals drive the modern world. Yukon companies are finding them.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Nicole Adshead-Bell, and I am here with my business partner, Liz Monger. We're in NIKII Communications, and we run the Yukon Mining Alliance. And we're here with our colleague from the Yukon government, Samson Hartland. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, the esteemed, shades when I say that, Dr. Nicole Adshead-Bell. Nikki, as we know her, is a geologist with nearly 3 decades of navigating the wild and often bewildering world of mining and finance. She's dabbled in everything from geology consulting, fund management, and investment banking to resource company executive and director roles. Basically, if it involves rocks, stocks, and risk, she's probably been there, done that. Along the way, she's kicked rocks, literally, and sometimes with geologists still using a compass, on over 300 exploration, development, and mining projects across 6 continents. We hope you enjoy this panel, and we look forward to all of you having a conversation with these companies, reaching out to them after the panel, or certainly after the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Whenever I hear my bio read out, I realise I need to make it a lot shorter. But congratulations to you in the audience who've stuck around. We're on the home stretch. And for those of you that are watching in the video at a later date, there is standing room only in this facility. So well done to that. It shows the power of the draw of the Yukon. So why are we here talking about the Yukon? The Yukon, we've seen some amazing discoveries recently with Snowline. You have a very, very supportive government and regulatory framework. We've just had, interestingly, probably I think the first transaction in Canada where a First Nations group, the Selkirk First Nations, are in the process of acquiring a project out of bankruptcy, Minto Mine. We have had evidence of an ability to be able to fund, advance and build projects with the Minto Mine in the last copper cycle, and just as a point of economic returns. And thank you very much, Andrew, for pointing me towards this, but during the life of of Minto, it has paid in excess of $35 million to the Selkirk First Nation, and so a direct recent example of economic returns that have positively impacted communities. So enough about the Yukon, and moving on to our panel, because we're going to be talking about the Yukon a lot throughout this. To my left, we have Andrew Kahn, who's Vice President Corporate Development of Cascadia Minerals. Next to Andrew, Darwin Green, who's Executive Chair of Onyx Gold Corp. And last but not least, Rory Quinn, President and CEO of the Yukon Metals. So the 3 of you in the Yukon, starting with you, Andrew, why do you think the Yukon is one of the most compelling places to explore in 2025?
I think it really speaks to the geologic potential of it. I mean, everyone thinks of Yukon as this big mining jurisdiction. We've all heard of the gold rush. We know about this past and this history. But if you actually sit down and look at it from a modern exploration perspective, there's been surprisingly little focus in Yukon compared to a lot of other parts of Canada. So there's an ability there to make these new discoveries, to make them at surface in ways that I don't think exist in a lot of other places. You see great discoveries being made across Canada, but a lot of them are in districts that are really well known, where people are reinventing an old concept or something like that. But in Yukon, as you mentioned, Snowline, it's a brand new discovery. It's a remarkable one. There's so many of these being made in Yukon that I think just speaks to that untapped potential still present up there.
And one thing I thought, and I'd be interested in your perspectives on this as well, the recent MOU, very, very recent announcement between BC and the Yukon about connecting the power grid, because one of the challenges when it's talked about the Yukon is lack of power in terms of building out some of the larger projects.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, it is the geological potential, the endowment there. It is just one of those, the rocks, the crust has got awesome potential to host big deposits, and we're seeing that with the exploration that's happening. I think the other piece is a government that gets it and understands the importance of mining, and I think communities and society as a whole, there's not a huge number of people that live in the Yukon, but I think mining touches each and every one in some way in the Yukon, and that means something in terms of just broader support. Yeah, so I mean, those are the principal reasons for me why I like it.
I agree with your point on the government. We gave a short course there a number of years ago, and it was really interesting how many government representatives were there, and it shows a commitment to understanding what our business is and the business of mining. And Rory?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the panel. It's just almost an absurd level of prospectivity in the Yukon. In my past life, I was with Wheaton Precious Metals for 7 years, and was on site at really numerous developments across the Americas. I've never seen prospectivity like there is in the Yukon. And I mean, for an example, we have an asset called Star River, which is on an all-access road plowed by the government. You can drive somewhat up the mountain near the outcrop, hike for 10 minutes, and you can literally hack metal out of the ground. Right? You can trip over discovery in the Yukon.
Geologists get to be lazy, that's what you're saying. And fighting off bears. And I think with Snowline's discovery, I'd be interested in your observations about has that opened up the potential access to the investing community? Are you getting more incoming calls and interest?
Well, it's certainly been a benefit for us to have the Birdall family name behind it, the success that Snowline have had. I think it's fair to say developing now a world-class deposit. I think that those words get overused in the space, but I think if Valley doesn't qualify, then perhaps it has no meaning. Definitely, I think there's folks that invested in Snowline that have invested in us, and there's people that missed on Snowline that have invested in us. So yeah, we've had a great time of it, and yeah, it's great to have Ron Birdall involved, who really leans in with our group and our technical team, and we'll have a YMA sanctioned site visit soon, and Ron Birdall will be there, and we'll get to host a really good group of folks.
And Darwin, I mean, you have been exposed to various parts of North America, and Onyx was a spin out, and you're in Ontario and the Yukon. And what's your sense of, is there an increased level of interest because of the success that Yukon is having?
100%, like 1,000% really. I mean, I think you get, and it's interesting because Snowline itself is actually the product of 10 years earlier. There was a discovery, it was a Carlin-esque Nevada-style discovery. They didn't ultimately pan out the way we had all hoped, but it actually generated a tremendous amount of interest that you could raise capital for the type of stuff that's really hard to finance. And it's a challenge in our space, right? The grassroots work that finds the new discoveries that creates the most value, it's a bit of a paradox. They're often the hardest things to finance. And that ATAC discovery, even though it didn't fully pan out, and it still has a chance, it ultimately led to the core position that we have, and it led to what Scott and Ron did, and they persevered for 10 years. And in fact, even with Snowline, they weren't going out for a big bulk tonnage lower grade system. They were actually originally looking for higher grade vein systems, and then found something else. And so, that Snowline, in my view, is a direct Valley discovery is a direct result of ATAC. It took 10 years, and I think Snowline's doing the same thing for other people right now in terms of being able to finance you. We spun out a company. We were able to raise $8.5 million in a really tough market, really all on the premise that we might have a chance of finding another Snowline.
Yeah, proximity effect. And Andrew, how have you found it?
Well, I mean, I think absolutely, just to echo what's been said here, you know, it's bringing a whole nother level of attention, I think, to Yukon that's been absent for a while. And it's great to hear you citing ATAC, because our company is a spin out of that sale of ATAC to Hecla Mining Company. And, you know, back in the day, ATAC, I think, did have a bit of an international stage presence there, following up on this new Carlin-style gold discovery. But, you know, we went through a bit of the downturn in 2016 through 2020-ish, and a little bit of that interest faded away from the Yukon, I think undeservedly so. But Snowline's really bringing back that international focus in a way that's, I think, been absent from Yukon for a bit.
I mean, from my perspective, the lesson of ATAC, and I was working for a fund at the time, and we were investors in ATAC, was when you have a discovery and you have incredible parabolic share price performance, you need to raise as much money as possible.
We learned that lesson very well, yeah. And we raised a lot, but we could have raised more at the time.
You can always raise more. You raise as much as possible. And that would be my advice to Snowline as well. So obviously there is an elephant in the room. There's been some recent events in the Yukon that have perhaps been less positive for our industry with Victoria Gold situation. And maybe could you all talk to just how has that impacted both investors' reaction to your companies, and how are you messaging your commitment to social license and being a good environmental citizen?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, a lot of people, I think, expect that it's been a huge challenge. For us, it actually hasn't been that big of a problem. We're exploring for copper gold porphyries primarily, so it is a different metallurgical technology than at Eagle, and we don't have to deal with cyanide, so that's made it easy from our perspective as a company. But I think broadly, there's an understanding in the investor base that incidents sometimes happen with certain projects, and obviously that's not good, and we never want to see that happen any time in our industry. But you know, it's important to understand why that happened, and all collectively work forward to make sure it doesn't happen again. So, you know, we're very proactive about always reaching out to communities. As soon as we acquired the project that we're working on now, we built that dialogue. We've had community meetings, kind of all the way through that process of what unfolded with Victoria. And you know, people are asking different questions now. I think about there's maybe a little bit more understanding of mining technologies and things. They want to know about that earlier, but ultimately I think that's a good thing, because it's leading to more informed communities who can be part of those conversations and actually have that understanding about what a mine might look like down the road.
And Darwin, do you find when you're talking to whether it's the regulators or community members that there's an understanding of what exploration is in terms of its impact versus a mine, or is there a proactive educating that you have to do in that regard?
I think you're always educating or informing, and I hate using the word educate, but it's ultimately what it is. There's an element of disconnect in understanding what we're doing. You know, projects are always looked at. You got a project, it's a mine. You know, we've got a long ways to go to be a mine.
We wish that was the case.
In their minds, it's a mine always. And so, yeah, I mean, you're always trying to inform the people in the communities you're in, and I think it's in most companies' DNA now. It's just hardwired into all of us that you're doing the best you can in terms of informing people, engagement, building relationships, real relationships.
Yeah.
Not, and that's the starting point, because it's always, everything's a people. I mean, everything's a people business in a way, and I think community relations is a people business too, of getting to connect and communicate with people. And you know, Victoria Gold, it absolutely did put a cloud over things last year. You know, there was all this energy and momentum being driven from Snowline the previous year, and it impacted, I think, people's budgets and ability to raise money. But I think it's passing a bit, and it's really unfortunate, because I think that group actually had very good community relations. There was an engineering problem that failed, and we just can't let those things happen, right?
No, exactly. And Rory, with Yukon Metals, I feel like there's in the periodic table, you have almost every commodity that you have potential for on your project. And we've seen this over the last 5 years with this movement to net zero, and I think maybe a global realization that we need critical minerals, and governments waking up around the world that you actually need to invest in mining. And I think that has helped reframe some of the narratives around the negatives of mining. So how have you found that specifically? Because you're not just looking at gold, you're looking at copper and zinc and a whole bunch of other metals that form part of that critical minerals list.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that. So one of our assets is called AZ, and Ron Birdall named it that because he thought it would have every metal from A to Z, starting with antimony. And so, yeah, no, we're blessed with some wonderful assets that the Birdall family put together over 20 to 30 years. Relative to the gentleman's points about Victoria, I think it was really the elephant in the room last summer. Right, and so you'd go into, if you went into your meetings, the sales desk would be abuzz with, is there going to be an issue raising capital for Yukon stories, right? And so there definitely was that concern. I think they kind of viewed Yukon as a monolith, right, and not a vast territory bigger than the state of California, but with 40,000 people relative to 40 million people. Yeah, the territory is very, very different and diverse. We have had, I think, a lot of companies have had a pretty good time of it raising capital, and I think the market has voted with their wallet, right? We've raised $26 million over the last year, $11 million recently, and Fireweed have been able to raise money. I know Onyx have done very well. So it's, I think, I would say by September of last year, when we were at Beaver Creek, another very good conference, at Beaver Creek, I think people were really looking against the Yukon. We had 40 meetings. I would say a third of those were Corp Dev meetings of folks looking to gain access and exposure to the Yukon.
And I think the Yukon shows a real commitment to the sector with Yukon Invest and Nicole and Liz being involved in it, and you mentioned the upcoming tour. So it seems like the government is very prepared to put, to some degree, its money where its mouth is and to support things. So Andrew, your focus is on the Stikine. So can you just walk us through why this is important from a geological perspective for the geologists in the room, and what makes it a compelling opportunity from an investment perspective?
Absolutely. So yeah, Cascadia's focus is on exploring the extension of the Stikine terrain from BC into Yukon. And the Stikine terrain in BC hosts the Golden Triangle. It's got, very prolific porphyry deposits, red chris. It's got the KSM deposit that Seabridge is advancing. So, it's been very, very productive in BC. It's been thoroughly explored there. People are still making new discoveries, but that same package of rocks extends right up into Yukon. And people have a tendency to stop looking at the border because there's a line on a map. And we just looked at this and went, well, wait a second. This opportunity exists up here to look for the same style of deposits. And the nice thing about where it is in Yukon is the Alaska Highway just runs right up through the middle of it. So it's actually one of the more accessible parts of Yukon. It's just seen comparatively little exploration. So that's our focus. Our focus is being kind of the first movers in Yukon Stikine to make these new discoveries in there that we can make close to infrastructure effectively at surface.
And I suppose all the learnings from the Golden Triangle, because there's been such a focus of activity that you can transport and translate.
Well, that's exactly it, right? You've got these great deposit models there. You've got understandings of how to take things from that early stage through geophysics and into the drilling. So we're kind of just following a recipe someone's already done the hard work on.
And moving on to your catch property, so it's in an area that there's very little historical exploration, and we do find in our sector when it's a new discovery, it's often not. It was, tires were kicked over 100 years ago. So number one, what attracted to you and what have you found from an exploration perspective so far?
Yeah, and I know what you mean, right? There's so many projects where it's a new take on the project or a new zone on a property. This is a truly new discovery. It was made by a prospector in 2020, and he was following up on regional silt data that the Yukon government has collected. And that's, I think, another positive thing in Yukon is there's this broad base of publicly available data that you can work off. So he was following up on that. He was utilizing the government grants that exist for individual prospectors to go out and do that work, and found significant amounts of copper mineralization effectively at surface. So this was back in the ATAC Resources days, and we optioned that property off of him in 2022, and started doing our own exploration on it, moving it forward. Then we spun out Cascadia in 2023 when ATAC got acquired by Hecla, and did our first drill program on the project that fall. And we've looked into it. There's no documented history of a claim ever having been staked there before, no recorded samples having been collected, and the closest ever diamond drill hole is 75 kilometers away. So we've now drilled into a copper porphyry there. We got 116 meters of 0.3 copper and 0.3 gold in the second ever drill hole into that target, which, if you know about copper porphyry exploration, you don't expect to hit right off the bat.
Congratulations. And so maybe you could just walk through how much cash you have on the balance sheet and the key catalysts that our investors can look to expect this year.
Yeah, so right now we've got about 1.8 million in our balance sheet. We do have an exploration program that's currently underway. We started a couple weeks ago. The drill started turning on Sunday, so it's an exciting time for us right now. We've got multiple porphyry targets on that property that are exciting, but for us it's a bit of a how best to prioritize our resources exercise right now. And at the end of last season, we had crews just following up on some interesting copper mineralization that was about 2 kilometers north of our porphyry target. And one of the samples they took returned over 1,000 grams gold from outcrop. So obviously that's attracted a bunch of our attention. We had a limited time to go in last year and follow up on that, but again, we got 187 grams gold, 140, all from outcrop samples, but you know, it's telling us there's something going on there with an epithermal gold signature, which makes sense in relation to the broader porphyry environment. So that's our focus at the moment this year, as we are drill testing right now underneath that outcrop target. But we hope to, a little bit later in the season, get back to the porphyries as well.
Yes, hopefully the geological gods are smiling upon you.
I know.
On the subject of, sorry.
No, I was going to say, it doesn't get better, though, from what we've seen at surface.
That's true.
We're optimistic.
On the subject of gods, Darwin, with the proximity of King with the proximity of King Tut and some of the potential geological similarities to Snowline, how's that framed, how you're looking at it from an exploration perspective and how you're messaging that to the market?
Yeah, I mean, what we have is, we were talking earlier, what we were looking for was a Carlin-style thing back when the claims were first acquired. We went through the Yukon government data set and found regional silt anomalies, so this was another kind of Greenfields type discovery at the time, and what we found was a really big footprint of gold in soils, 2 of them actually, separated by about 10 kilometers on quite a large property, and haloing 2 intrusive centers. And at the time, we said to ourselves, we know exactly what this is. It's an intrusion-related gold system, and the papers on intrusion-related gold systems and the models you looked at the time were generally sort of half-gram to 1-gram, sub-gram systems, and very attractive in their own right, but when you start to get sub-gram, the further you're away from infrastructure, the tougher it can be. So it sat there. We really liked it, hung on to it, and then along came Scott Berdal and the Valley Discover, and they rewrote the book on what intrusion-related gold systems can be. And it may be a one-off, maybe a rare one that is, 2 grams, 1.5 to 2 grams, but maybe there's something special about that area, whether it's the host rocks that these intrusions are coming in through or something about the intrusions themselves. I don't know. All I know is they made a big discovery, and to your point, I think it is a truly world-class discovery, and we had projects that were basically readied in terms of having big soil grids on them right next door, so it made our job pretty easy in terms of raising money, so it's that intrusion-related opportunity. And when you get these things that are that fertile and you've got sheeted veining, it sometimes takes a little while. We all think, oh, well, it's a big intrusion, it's all going to be an ore deposit. You still have to hunt around and find the sweet spot within them, but to be able to have that footprint to start gets you pretty excited.
Yeah, and I think maybe to your point is those of us that are geologists, and there's 2 of us on the stage. You're an engineer, aren't you?
Yeah.
That we can be very, very model driven, and so we like to put things in models and sometimes twist the rocks to fit a preconceived view rather than going from first principles. Maybe you can just talk to the initial exploration results, the scale, what's your exploration strategy in this moving forward? How are you prioritizing your projects in the Yukon versus Ontario?
Yeah, so I guess we hit the ground running. So we did all this work, I think it was 12 years ago when we created the company. Then we came out, had a bunch of money, and we had drills chasing right on us. And so we went out and drilled what we thought were our best targets, but we only really had a couple of weeks on the ground to get things ourselves ready. And they were not bad places to stick the drill holes. It's just we didn't have the full breadth of knowledge on the property. And so concurrent with that program, we flew airborne geophysics. We had a mag survey across the whole property. We expanded our soil samples. We did more prospecting, and a much broader picture emerged out of that. One example is, so there's King Tut and there's Golden Mask. That's a separate intrusion, and we had there was a relatively small exposure of intrusive, and so that's what we thought was there, and we had the gold anomaly associated with that, so we put some holes into it, and they all hit, but they weren't 200 meters at 2 grams. They were more anomalous. They were interesting. Then at the end of the season, we got our data back on the airborne survey, and we found that the footprint of that intrusion is about 7 times larger. And what it looks like is one that's just barely becoming unroofed, and some of that you might not get as strong a gold soil anomaly when you've got a little bit of hornfels cover over it or something like that. So we've learned a lot on that one, and it really needs more drilling. On the other one, our King Tut, we found that there's good sheeted veins. We actually secured a hole in our property that we didn't have. Snowline had it, so we did a deal with Snowline to pick that piece up. And what we found, there's a shoulder to that one intrusion that seems to produce a lot higher grade gold. So this summer we want to get out there and better define that, and if conditions are right, possibly drill it later in the year.
And the balance sheet question, how much?
Oh yeah, so it's interesting. So the Yukon story allowed us to get launched with $8.5 million in a raise 2 years ago. We've had a recent discovery in Timmins, which is a nice balance from a seasonality perspective, and two phenomenal jurisdictions, and we now have a discovery there that's allowed us to fill the tills. So we've got about 15 million cash right now.
That's great. In this, in the junior world, that's yes, more than $1 million. So, Rory, so your portfolio has been built up over, is it 3 decades of prospecting by the Bedell family? You have a plethora of riches in the commodity complex. Maybe you could walk us through how are you focusing down and advancing your highest priority targets, and then what are your plans for exploration for this year?
Yeah, so the Birdalls had a vast portfolio, as you've referenced. They floated the primary gold assets in their family portfolio as Snowline. And what was the remainder was copper, gold, silver, lead, zinc, and critical metals. So there were 17 assets, which is too many, quite frankly. So we did need to bring some focus to what we were doing, and so we prioritized based on really 3 axes: high grade, potential for real scale, and proximity to road and power. And so we'll advance drilling on 3 exceptional properties in the Yukon this season. One is Star River. It's on a road, an all-access road that's plowed by the government year-round. I can fly to Whitehorse in 2 hours from Vancouver, jump in an F-150, and be on site in 5 hours. So the meaning, why that's meaningful for us having road access is we can bring in heavy machinery, rigs, people, we can expedite all by road, doesn't have to be helicopter supported. We feel we'll be able to drill well into winter as well with a winterized camp at Star River. So that's the proximity point. From the rock standpoint, we're finding almost 11,000 grams per ton silver at surface. You can literally hack galena with fine-grained silver out of the ground, outcropping. There's 101 gram per ton, up to 101 gram per ton gold. We see galena and highly oxidized arsenopyrite overlapped in multiple outcroppings on the property. In one specific area, which we'll advance our first drilling program on, we have our highest concentration of silver grade at surface, our highest gold grade, 101 gram per ton gold at surface, our biggest magnetic response from doing the geophysics suite, roughly 400 meters across, this incredibly powerful response, and our gravity, our biggest gravity response, 800 meters long, overlapping the same area. Really just a bullseye target for us. We'll drill 4,000 meters into that this season. We believe we'll be able to drill through a silver vein at surface into a gold-bearing manto roughly 50 meters beneath the surface. And for context, there was a mine in the area, a historic gold mine called the Quetzal Gold Mine, if you're familiar with it, and they were mining a gold-bearing manto, built their own processing facilities, haul roads, and etc. So that's what we think we'll be able to do at Star River. At AZ, we have 3.5% copper outcropping 6 kilometers away from the Alaska Highway. That outcropping is part of a 1.2 kilometer long Gossan zone that you can see from the air, rust-colored rocks all the way along, and you can really just walk that 1.2 kilometers, and there's just outcropping mineralization all the way along. That Gossan zone itself sits within a 5 kilometer long mineralized trend, at the end of which, at Maryland Creek, and we think this might be the source, The Birdalls delivered 10.3% copper in trenching. So real potential for grade here, 5 kilometers long. We'll hit that with induced polarization, magnetic, gravity. Those tools will fly the property. It's almost 12,000 hectares. Takes 15 minutes to cross it in a helicopter. Vast territory. Finally, at Birch, we have an asset there that was formerly a Sean Ryan property at Ryan Gold, and he had a gold and soil anomaly. We followed up on that. We used really high quality mechanized soil drilling there, drilling a meter into the permafrost, so avoiding smearing at surface. And we developed a 1,400 meter long gold and soil anomaly up to 0.99 gram per ton gold. So almost a gram per ton gold in soil. I mean, as you know, gram per ton gold in rock is mineable in some cases. And so up to 0.24% copper in soil. It is mostly overburden there. But what we see, we also saw what limited outcrop, subcrop, and float there was, up to 14 gram per ton gold in rock and rock chips, and multiple samples of 2.4% copper. So we'll advance 3,000 meters of drilling on that this season. We believe we have an intact copper porphyry there, and so we're taking some big swings. I mean, this is.
And you've got the balance sheet to take big swings.
Yeah, fortunately we do, and look, I think we've really benefited from very patient capital, right, and so yeah, we've been able to, as Darwin mentioned, we've been able to cash up to, and have over $17 million in the treasury. Our exploration program this season is $7 million, so we can afford to get more aggressive. But these initial holes are going to tell us so much, and these are all like incredibly underexplored areas that really haven't seen any modern exploration. So.
You made a good point about the seasonality, and this is a question to all of you, so anyone jump in, is how do you manage when you're an exploration company, your share price is driven by alpha and generally only reacts to positive drilling news. You will always have to raise money, but you've got a short season or a short window to produce results. So how do you look at that when you're strategizing around raising capital, capital allocation, and news flow? And the second part to that question, does that sometimes mean that you can jump into drilling too early?
Is that for?
Whoever wants to open it, and others can jump in.
I mean, I think it can make you jump into drilling too, but there is a positive to it. I mean, the investors don't maybe like it as much, or it's not as obvious, but it does allow you to spend the time to think about your data.
Yeah.
You do all this drilling, and you can do real geology work on that data, and I think that's something that's often overlooked because it doesn't sell the tickets as much when you're actually going doing financing, but it's critical to the process. And so there is a benefit to having some time frame, but yeah, being honest, that can be a challenge. There's certainly projects in the Yukon that you can drill year round. Helicopter supported things are tougher.
Yeah, and more expensive.
Yes.
A lot more expensive.
Well, they can be. And I mean, it's been interesting, right? Because back in the past when I worked on ATAC resource, it was fixed wing, and then helicopter was very expensive. But, you know, our project right now, it is heli supported, but we're only 10 kilometers off the highway, and we're staging out of a government gravel pit. We've got our crews staying in the local hotel that's owned by the First Nation, you know, so we're already giving back to the community as much as we can by utilizing local services, but it keeps the cost surprisingly affordable for a helicopter-supported remote program. So, you know, it's not always the end of the world to be using a helicopter. You just don't want to be completely reliant on it.
And what do you think is the biggest advantage of working in the Yukon, and what's the biggest disadvantage?
I mean, I'd go back to the earlier point about the potential, you know, and I think you hear it from all of us here is we're making these new discoveries. I mean, our project, you can walk across basically a sea of malachite in some areas. There's nowhere else in Canada right now where you can find that degree of copper mineralization at surface. It's all been looked at already. So that's a huge advantage from my perspective. And I think another big positive is some of the things you cited earlier about the work government's doing to really promote the jurisdiction. And one of my pet projects has been this power intertie that I've been talking about for years, and it's exciting to see that really getting traction. And there's been $40 million of federal money allocated to do the study work there to get to the point where they'll have a construction-ready decision on intertying the Yukon grid to BC. That is an absolute game changer for the industry up there, having a secure access to clean power. So I think that's just going to continue to build catalysts for Yukon. It's going to get more and more on everyone's radar. And all these Yukon companies are undervalued right now. There's going to be massive multiples there as more attention starts turning on the jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, there's a large number of projects that really what's only stopping them, it's infrastructure constrained. And I think, Darwin, I'd like to hear your thoughts. We discussed this during the panel about what the Yukon government could do in terms of small modular nuclear reactors.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's, looking to the future, I think nuclear and small modular nuclear is a real, it has the potential to be a true game changer for the North, places where you don't have the infrastructure, right? And I think it can actually start with communities. I see on the U.S. side, they're looking at it in some of these, Army bases that are in the far north, and I think the Canadian government could look at that, because you need somebody to break the ice in the permitting process that's not mining. But if you do that, and it'll be net benefit for these communities that are reliant on diesel, quite vulnerable. It's very, very expensive power for these communities, and the technology's there. It's incredibly safe, and it's incredibly attractive at a lot of levels. And what's happened concurrent, I think, in the mining space is there's a real advance in technology of electrification of mining equipment. And so you've got kind of the two together, and it makes these what were once orphaned or isolated assets that have incredible endowment that are sitting out there, that all of a sudden you can change because you can bring that power to them in a much more economical way and do everything. So it's kind of something I think government should do. I think infrastructure as a whole is a government responsibility. It's one of the places, permitting and infrastructure. And one of my other themes, if you give me just a minute here, is looking at the sort of North Canal Road, where you've got multiple types of commodities all sort of concentrated in one area, and you can take kind of a strategic look of, there's a lot of strategic metals, and there's a real economic concentration in one area. So and what happens is you build those roads and you build the infrastructure, more exploration is born out of it. But you've got a tungsten deposit that's very critical. You've got a big silver lead zinc deposit in the SEDEX projects there, and you've got Snowline. And for us, the more of that infrastructure, the lower the threshold it takes to get something new online.
Yeah, and from the Yukon government's perspective, is a plethora of resources. If you untap their economic potential with that infrastructure, the economic returns, and just again to highlight, because I think it's very interesting, because we see the dollar figures, the Selkirk Nation, and that's a direct recent example. It's a very, very material amount of money going into a relatively small group, a small population. So Rory, just to touch on your thoughts, what do you think that the Yukon government could do, given that you're in the critical minerals complex, which normally requires a little bit more complicated processing versus a CIL, amenable gold deposit?
Yeah, I guess the politics have probably gotten quite a bit more complex over the last 5 to 6 months, but I think a bigger deep water port at Skagway is something that could unlock that potential. But I think there is a lot of senior processors and companies that trade and process zinc, for instance, and tungsten that are looking for offtake, right? And so, you see Sumitomo in the area. Glencore have a real interest in that area. They've got a smelter in Quebec that they want to be able to fill. I think for copper, and the likes of Western Copper and Gold, and being able to move copper, I think you need a big port that you can ship out of. But look, I think it's a double-edged sword when you mentioned that there's a seasonality in the Yukon, and I think and that's true. In some cases, you can drill much later into the winter or even through winter, but I think that's also the reason you have this vast mineral endowment that really hasn't been explored thoroughly at all, right? And yeah.
I think you made a very good point, actually, that I think sometimes us that are just looking from afar, that the Yukon also has this tick of international large company approval, and we've got sizable presence, and not necessarily that we always need the majors tick of approval, but I think the outside community reacts to that, and governments as well, in terms of bringing some pressure to bear at higher levels.
Right.
So I was told, because on the copper panel earlier today, I went over time, apologise for that. You never want to be that person. So we're coming to a close, and I think we're going to finish early. So I advise all of you in the audience, which again is very, very, very packed, standing room only, to come up and chat to these guys and find out more about the Yukon. And of course we have Liz, somewhere over there, and Nicole as well, that would be more than happy to talk about what's going on in the Yukon and the benefits of being exposed to the Yukon. And please join me in thanking our panelists.